limit of the year. It's very central in what happens our whole year. What happens on Purim? Purim is a shift. It's a turning point. Because on Purim, we get this connection to happiness, to simcha. And simcha is like at the center of Judaism, happiness. The Gemara speaks about it sort of in an interesting hint. It talks about Rabbi Nasi, that it says he planted a plant of simcha on Purim. The Gemara starts talking, are you allowed to do a malach on Purim, the whole discussion, and then it says, well, it's a plant of simcha. So it could be that it sounds like it means in literal sense, certain type of plants they planted in order to use for happy occasions, But I think the hint there is that you plant a seed of simcha on Purim. So what happens on Purim is that there's a seed that goes into a person, potentially on Purim, which stays with them and grows the whole year. It's a preparation for Pesach, which is a big Yom Tov of simcha, it's man of simcha, of going out of Mitzrayim, and it goes into the whole year, the simcha. So Purim is very, very key. So I want to talk about Purim. So I want to talk about Purim today. I'm going to speak about Yehuda also a little bit, and that's what he talks about also on Purim. Yehuda, he talks about simcha a lot. So I want to mention it, but I'm going to talk a little bit in general about Purim and about simcha really. So, because I want to sort of go with the lights of Purim right now and to speak about that. I feel like it's proper to do that. Even though there's very interesting things in the parsha this week, I wanted to speak about, but they're a little deep, a little heavy, and it's like the end of the Zman, end of the year, and I want to take away that simcha, so I want to talk about that. So here, I forgot to pass this out, so let's pass this out. I want to learn with you in this context a piece from Rabbi Nachman Mebreslov, from Likutei Moharan. Here, pass this around two ways. Here's a piece from Rabbi Nachman about simcha, so I want to learn about this and bring it back into a little bit to Purim and talk about this thing of simcha, this concept of simcha.
Settling of knowledge?
Yeah. Okay, so this is from Likutei Moharan Tinyana Yud, and I translated here. I hope the translation is pretty good.
We have two papers?
One paper. Sorry, that's a mistake. Okay, so I'm reading the English. The sole reason that people are distant from God and do not draw closer to Him is that they lack Yishuv Hadat and fail to settle their mind. So Rabbi Nachman says like this, that why do people not get involved, not ever get so involved in serving Hashem? And why are we not closer than we are? What's in the way of serving Hashem, of our ability, of our motivation to go and serve Hashem? So he says the thing that's in the way is, he calls that a lack of Yishuv Hadat. So Yishuv Hadat means, we call that tranquility, let's say. Yishuv Hadat, the tranquility of the mind. And they fail to settle their mind. They have trouble settling their mind. So people are busy in their heads. And that's what gets in the way of our ability to serve Hashem. Why? It is essential to serve a person, that a person strives to reflect on the purpose of all the desires and distractions of this world. This includes the desires which are bound up with the body, and also the non-physical desires, such as honor. I think this translation is a loose one, but what Rabbi Nachman is saying here is, I think there's sort of something missing in the translation. He's saying that we have to realize that all the desires we have are not the main point of life. We get caught up in our different desires. We desire physical things, and we desire honor, and we desire other kinds of things, and those things get us distracted. But if we could sort of sort out like what's important in life, we should get a little free from being pulled after all these kind of desires, and we would be miyashiv ourselves. We would get tranquil from all the things which are pulling us. So then we will surely return to God. So that's how he's summing up that what is the thing that brings out the ability to serve God, to serve Hashem? That's Yishuv Hadas, tranquility of the mind. To get tranquility of the mind, you have to be able to look at life and sort of what's the most important things and what's not most important things. You can't get caught up in all kinds of desires, including desires for honor and appreciation, as well as for things and other kinds of success and fulfillment. You have to withdraw from all that and get Yishuv Hadas, become tranquil. But you should know. So what gets in the way of that? Why can't we become tranquil? Why is it hard to become tranquil and collect ourselves? But no, depression makes it impossible to direct the mind the way one wants. Atzvut, in Hebrew it is. He calls it depression here. You should know that atzvut, sadness, depression, makes it impossible to direct the mind the way one wants. When a person is taken up with some kind of a sadness, some kind of a atzvut, so then he's not able to settle his mind. It is therefore difficult for a person to attain yeshivadat. It's hard for him to get a settled mind. Only joy enables him to direct the mind as he pleases and attain yeshivadat. Only when he's happy, then he starts to be able to control this and starts to settle his mind. This is because joy is the realm of freedom. As in, for through joy you will go out. The pasuk says, Ki b'simcha seitzeu. With simcha you will come out. So in Rabbi Nachman's learning, that means that through simcha, through joy, a person can come out of his preoccupation, his state of preoccupation. He starts to get a calm mind when you're happy. Through joy, a person becomes free and goes out of exile. A person gets out of this exile of the mind, exile of the psychology. That people, and basically what I would say on one foot to explain this is that when a person's not happy, he really wants to be happy, in a deep way. And because he wants to be happy, at least he really wants to be happy. He has a deep desire to be happy, to have tranquility, to be happy and have well-being. So what happens is, there's like a program running, in his mind to try to figure out how to get happy. So he's busy. His mind's busy. Whereas when the person gets happy, then that program turned off, and now he can engage other subjects. He can talk about all kinds of things. His mind gets free. Like he's ready to talk about the whole world when he's happy. There's a Gemara about that, by the way. Gemara says, who is it? One of the Aharon, that after he gave a share, he would be in a happy state. And then he said, you could ask me anything. I could talk about everything now. It says just that. That when a person's happy, his mind gets very tranquil. And the thing that's getting in the way of happiness, getting in the way of tranquility, is that our minds are caught up because something's in the back of our mind running. What can I do to make myself happier? And and so when you get happy, that turns off, and you're ready to think about everything. Therefore, by binding the mind to joy, a person's mind and dot are then free, and he's not conceptually in exile. He's not exiled. He's saying that if a person is busy in his mind and he can't think about the bigger picture, he's exiled. He's psychologically exiled. But when he bounds his mind to joy, when his mind is connected to happiness, then he becomes free. His mind is free. His thoughts are free. He can choose to think about what he wants. As a result, he can direct his mind as he pleases and attain yeshivadat, since his mind is free and not in exile. For exile unsettles the mind, as the sages of blessed memory taught regarding the Ammonites and the Moabites. So now he brings an interesting example of this, that we find by Ammon and Moab that they never were exiled physically. He brings this sort of a parable over here. It's interesting. Their minds were settled because they were never exiled. As it is stated, Moab has been at ease from his youth on and never gone into exile. Therefore, its fine flavor has remained. So in other words, this nation of Moab, which they were in the same place. Had this civilization which continued in the same place for many, many generations. They have a calmness to spirit. So there, Rabbi Nachman is bringing an example from the external world that if you're in exile, then you don't have yeshivadas. Means that I would say just on one foot, like in other words, if a person are out of their place and they always have to get caught up in how to deal with it. If everything is familiar, everything is your own, it's home team, so then you feel more comfortable. Then you could start thinking about other things. But when you're busy, people are in exile, they're out of their place, they're trying to be happy. So what happens is they have less calmness. Okay. It's interesting to me here that I'm going to get back to this point that the physical reality is related to this also. Rabbi Nachman is talking about psychology, but then he connects it to the physical, and he uses the physical as an example. You guys with me? It's a little bit deep, but okay. So, just recapping. Let me recap before Dave. 1 second. Recap what I just said. So, what Rabbi Nachman says is that if people would be free to think what they wanted to think about the questions they have about life. What am I doing here? Where do I want to go? Like, why are things the way they are? If a person would really think about those things, he would go start serving Hashem, because that's where it would lead him. Like, oh wow, I'm here to serve Hashem. I'll get close to Hashem. I'll understand things more as I serve Hashem. People would go there if they had that freedom of thought. But because they don't have freedom of thought, it gets in the way of their ability to serve Hashem. They're busy. Their minds are busy. Why are their minds busy? Because they're not happy enough. They're not happy. They're lacking happiness. They have a little bit of depression or sadness. And the sadness makes them preoccupied. So when a person gets happy, he gets freedom of mind. He gets tranquility of mind. And that brings him closer to Hashem. So that's basically, that's the word here. Question, David?
Why are we saying it that way? Because doesn't it also work the other way, that if one can bind oneself to tranquility, that you can discover joy that way? That people, same thing, that people are caught up in their, I've got to do this, I've got to do this, and they're frantic, and if they can just calm down for a little bit, that's then when they find their joy and the connection as well.
Okay, it might be. I hear that it might work the other way also as well. But this is what Rabbi Nachman is stressing here. Stressing that it's a very interesting thing, that you need to be happy. Try to be happy. If you'll get yourself happier, then you'll actually start reaching your goals. Because your mind will settle down, your mind will open up, you'll be able to talk about the big picture, and that's good. That'll bring you towards Avodas Hashem. Then he talks about how you get happy, and that's obviously a big subject. But I want to talk about a particular angle here. I want to talk about the Megillus Rus, and Megillus Esther, about Purim. Talk about Purim and the happiness of Purim we just came from, and what happens inside the Megillah has to do with this. It's very interesting. Also, first, before I actually do want to say something for Mitzvah Yehuda. So this is what Mitzvah Yehuda talked about in terms of Purim. He talked about happiness. This is one of the things he talked about a lot, Simcha. And he said Purim is a very big time for Simcha. Like I'm speaking, he spoke about it like that. And he told stories about Purim. He told a story about Rabbi Eger. He spoke about Hasidim, about Chasidut in the context of Purim and Simcha, Rabbi Tzvi Yehuda. He describes how the Hasidim had this big thing with Simcha. This is one of the things that Hasidim really worked on, Chasidut. They worked on this thing, which, as you see from Rabbi Nachman here, I'll give you a big example of it, Rabbi Nachman, that they worked on Simcha a lot. They were very interested in doing mitzvahs with Simcha. So as a result, they would prepare for their mitzvahs. That's why they do things like mikvah, and other kind of ways of preparing for mitzvahs. So there's one Rebbe, his name was Rabbi Eger. So he was the grandson of Rabbi Akiva Eger. So Rabbi Akiva Eger was one of the greatest Gaonim in Torah of all modern times. He was just gigantic. He was a tzaddik, and he was the biggest Talmid Chacham in the world. Everybody loves Rabbi Akiva Eger. As far as explaining the Rabbi Akiva Eger, that was his name. He was explaining the halacha and the depths of the Gemara and the sugyas. He was the greatest. His grandson was Rabbi Eger, who surprisingly became a Hasidic Rebbe. So it seems like Rabbi felt there's something we have to work on apart from the classical Torah and mitzvot that needs to be worked on in our stage as Am Yisrael. And that's one of the things is Simcha. So we had to work on our Simcha more. And this person, Rabbi Eger, he was a very big Rebbe, a very big Adam Gadol, big tzaddik. And he used to prepare a lot for tefillah. He used to do a lot of preparations for mitzvahs and for tefillah. And it had to do with this. Like he describes for Yehuda, like we don't really understand that so much. It's hard for us to understand exactly what they were doing. It was a very lofty world. These people were Rabbi Eger. He was a student of the Ishbitzer Rebbe. So these were like great geniuses and very high level. And they had this thing, they knew how to think about things. They had deep thoughts and philosophical depth that they did things with. They really worked with them in deep ways. So they used to have a lot of preparations for their tefillahs and for their mitzvahs. So he brings a story. He heard from a person who was a chassid of Rabbi Eger. Reb Kroll, his name was. He lived here in Eretz Yisrael. So he says stories like this. One time it was Yom Kippur night, and all the Hasidim were there, the Hasidim of Rabbi Eger, and they're waiting for him to come in for the Yom Kippur tefillah, for Kol Nidre. He didn't come. He didn't show up. It was like 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, not there. 10 o'clock, not there. Everyone was waiting. Finally, 11 o'clock, he comes in and they start. Okay. So where was he? He was preparing himself. He was busy. He wanted to come into Yom Kippur with the right kind of simcha, right kind of kavanot. So he was all this preparation. So then, the story is that Rav Yehuda, he asked Rav Kroll, this Talmud of Rav Leib, so what were the Hasidim doing all the time while they were waiting for the Rebbe to come in? For 2 or 3 hours, they were waiting on Yom Kippur. So what were they doing? So Rav Kroll says, so what do you think? So Rav Yehuda says, well, I think they were probably learning. Probably learning like maybe Masechta Yuma or Mishnayot, or something like that. So Rav Kroll says, no, they weren't learning. So what were they doing? He says they were singing and dancing on Leil Yom Kippur. So Rav Yehuda says they were singing and dancing. What were they singing? So Rav Kroll says, well, what do you think? So Rav Yehuda says, I think they were probably singing Ashrei mi shelo chata. There's a song about fortunate one who doesn't do a sin, and if he does do a sin, he does tshuva. It's like a very deep song. He used to sing this on Sukkot. So he says, Rav Kroll, no, they weren't singing that. You don't understand Chassidim. Rav Kroll says to Rav Yehuda, you understand Chassidim. They were singing something else. What were they singing? They were singing Shoshanas Yaakov for 2-3 hours. The song they were singing on Purim, because there's a deep connection between Purim and Yom Kippurim. It has to do with Simcha. So it's singing Shoshanas Yaakov.
It's on Yom Kippur, you're saying?
On Yom Kippur, yes, on Kippur night. So that's the story. So Rav Yehuda was telling over this story. So you say Rav Yehuda loves this story because it shows like this deep investment in the Simcha Shal Mitzvah and Simcha, happiness, And it's very, very interesting. Obviously, we don't do that anymore. We don't prepare. We don't sing on Yom Kippur for 2 or 3 hours. I don't think anybody does that. Everything has moved to the middle. Like, Hasidim learn a lot. L'tayim, they sing a lot and they dance a lot. Everyone, it's all Baruch Hashem is coming together more and more. That's what's going to happen as Mashiach comes. But these were very big innovators in ways of bringing Simcha into the Torah, into the mitzvahs. So that's the story for Rav Yehuda. Oh, so now I want to talk a little about the Megillah and how this relates to what we're talking about. I mean, just on the surface, Purim is all about Simcha because what happens on Purim? What happens on Purim is that first we listen to the Megillah. The Megillah describes how Hashem is hidden, and Hashem is hidden in the world, and sometimes Hashem becomes very hidden, and then at the end, Hashem is behind everything, right? So the Megillah brings that out. It's a Megaleh. It reveals that Hashem is running the world, and despite the hiddenness, that's what's really going on. So we experience that, and you start to get happy. You start to see, okay, there's something. There's an order here. You get happy from that alone. And then the rest of the day, we build on the happiness. We have the Sudas, Shalkmanos, and we have Metanas Evyonim, and it's all about being happy. And we sing, we dance on Purim, because that brings out Simcha. Now, if you look on the Megillah, though, it's also talking about something Simcha also inside the Megillah. The story itself has to do with Simcha, with happiness, in very deep ways. So it says more than just that we see Hashgacha Pratis, there's something about the Purim experience which is a special expression of Simcha and needs a study a little bit. So, 1 second. Sorry. So, what happened in Purim was that there were no miracles on Purim. There was no open miracles, like there was no changing of nature in the open sense. Like when we went out of Egypt, so Hashem changed nature. Right? He brought out you should call it that. They brought miracles, open miracles. Right? You can't. Well,
that would have been
he brought
the Torah.
Okay, that's true. But he brought out open miracles. Let's say, open miracles by going out of Egypt. But the story of Purim is hidden miracles, right, within nature, right? You don't see nature disappearing in like a different type of process going on, which is miracles that happened in Egypt. You see all of nature totally intact, and then you see miracles happening through nature. So, example of this is that when the decree comes out that Haman is going to kill all of the Jewish nation, So then Mordecai sends a message to Esther, you got to go in there and do something. And she says, like, I don't know what to do. There's nothing to do. Like, in other words, Haman has already been in there. Haman has convinced Achashverosh this is what has to be done. Achashverosh is anyway inclined towards anti-Semitism also, and they're very excited to destroy all the Jewish people, and the decree is out, there's nothing to do. So we can't change this. Haman and Achashverosh are best friends, there's nothing to do. So Mordecai says, you'll figure it out, do it, you know what I mean? So she goes in. And what happens is, it says, Lav Sharuch HaKodesh. She was very frightened, very what she didn't know was how to do it, what was she going to do. But then she started to get this Ruach HaKodesh. So what I think it means is that she started getting ideas. She started to have an idea what she could do. And then she realized, even though it's so far out, she started to feel inspired, this is going to work. And then sort of a flow of Ruach HaKodesh, of divine insight came into her. She had this amazing wisdom. So she comes in and she figures out exactly how to make things happen, to turn things around. If she didn't have this Ruach HaKodesh, she would have pleaded with Achashverosh the first time. How could you do this? It's not fair, And obviously that's not going to work because his heart is somewhere else. Instead, she has a whole method. She's brilliant. She come to the Suda with me and Haman. She makes Achashverosh jealous of Haman. She pumps up Haman's ego, and she gets everybody off guard. She turns things around. Second time to come back to the Suda, and the third thing, she's like a master manipulator. She's a master diplomat, politician, manipulator. It's genius. But it's not like she thought that out. It's like there was Ruach HaKodesh. She had this divine wisdom, that showed her what to do. Nowadays, they could have the arguments in the Knesset, and the fist fights, and all that kind of stuff, They have to learn a little bit how to play the other guy, If you go right in his face, it doesn't usually work, So she didn't do that. So what happened is that she won. In other words, she was able to move things around so that Achashverosh became now empathetic and sympathetic to her cause and estranged from Haman. She moved around his feelings. But this is all miracles happening through nature, right? And happening through this first of all, this divine wisdom coming down through Esther, and then being able to use that in such an amazing way. So then what happens is he becomes aligned with Esther to the extent that he said, yeah, go kill the Amalekim, go kill all your enemies, and all of them, wipe them out. Why would he say that? The answer is now he saw them as the enemies, which was correct, actually. That was necessary to do. It was a defensive war. Yehuda says this. That was a defensive war. Even though you're killing women, men and women and children, when you have such an enemy, that's how you win. Otherwise, you lose. So Achashverosh became an ally. So that's what happened. And then, so then they say, okay, now you have to nullify your decree. You sent out a decree that all the Jews are going to be killed, and now, king, you have to nullify it. So Achashverosh says, no, I can't do that. No nullification. Because once there's a decree that goes out with the stamp of the king, you can't nullify it. I'll just make another decree.
Is the reason for this because if people see that he pulls back a decree that has a stamp, they'll start thinking he's weak.
Oh,
and he can...
exactly. Very interesting. So that's what happened here. So it's interesting. The question I have is, Achashverosh is supposed to represent, that's the kingdom of earth representing the opposite kingdom of heaven, right? So there is such a thing as nullifying a decree. It does exist, right? For example, we were in Galut in, let's say, Egypt. That was like a decree. And then it got nullified. That's what I'm talking about, miracles. It was overrode, Also, there was another decree by the Chet Ego that Hashem made a decree to destroy Klal Yisrael and start again. And it was nullified because Moshe prayed, right? So sometimes there's a divine decree which is nullified. It exists, right? But here in the middle it says, no, once there's a decree of the king, you can't nullify it, right? So I was wondering about that. Why not? Who says you can't? Why is there such a, is that a concept true? It's not always true.
That king, it could be true, and that's his own rules.
Oh, so that's the answer. The answer is, in this time of history, when we're talking about the Nes of Purim, so already we're in the world of nature. And nature itself is a decree. That's Hashem's decree. And you can't, and we're not going to nullify that either. We're not going to nullify Achashverosh's decree, and we're not going to nullify Hashem's decree even. In other words, the two things are going together. And it's like Hirsch just said, of course, Achashverosh, he's this low fellow, And he's not going to do that. He's not going to agree to make himself look stupid. That's the story there. So we're not going to nullify the decree, and it has to do with the time of history. There was a different kind of miracle happening at this time. But history, a miracle within nature. And even Hashem is not going to nullify the decree. He's not going to make open miracles. It's going to be hidden. The decree of nature is not nullified. So he says, okay, you know what? So I'll tell you what I'll do. I won't nullify the decree, but I'll make a new letter that says that all the Jews should stand up for themselves. I'm going to publicly give the Haman's house to Mordechai and make all these gestures that show that the king supports the Jews. And I'm going to give them my permission, my haskama, to fight for themselves. And that's all the Jews needed. That was the end of the war. It's amazing. We didn't fight until 10 months later. But what happened at that point is, the Jews were now full of simcha and rejoicing, and they knew they were going to win. And they were not trained soldiers like the Amalekim were. But in the end, by the time they came to fight that war 10 months later, nobody stood against them. Like, what happened? So it was the power of simcha. It was the power of that it came down to them, this great, they saw the decree getting switched around. They saw Hashem working through Achashverosh. They saw the divine hand working through Esther and through Achashverosh, through Mordechai. And they had this great simcha. They had such a great simcha, the Gemara says, that they were, by the end of the miracle, they received the Torah anew. And the original receiving of the Torah, it's interesting, that was in the time of Nisei Mitzrayim, of when Hashem brought us miracles which were above nature. Then we received the Torah, but there was something missing from our relationship. There was a little bit less simcha. Now at this point, when we had this kind of miracles within nature, it seems like we went to a new level of simcha. We accepted the Torah with complete love and without any feeling of being forced. I mean, there's a higher level of simcha. It seems like when people experiences this kind of divine providence that happens through nature, it's especially inspiring and brings out happiness in the person. It's very interesting that. And why is that? I think when we see that we're partners in the process, that Hashem is working through us and He's using us. So that's very, very misameach. It's very, very lofty. And when Hashem does miracles outside of us, and we didn't have so much part in it, so then we're very happy that Hashem is doing that for us, but then what happens afterwards? We're back to the world of nature, which we are not necessarily on top of 100%, And so it seems like in a certain sense, like a miracle that's through nature brings out the biggest simcha, which is what happened then. They had such big simcha. So then it says like this. It says, I want to just tell you, this thing about, to the Jews, I want to tell you something from before we finish up here. To the Jews there was or v'simcha v'sasim v'ikar at this point. And the Gemara says Ora means light, V'simcha means happiness, Saso means rejoicing, and Yakar means honor. Okay? And the Gemara says, to the Jews there was Ora, that's Torah. They got Torah. V'simcha, that's Yom Tov. V'sason, that's Bris Milah. And Yakar, that's Tefillin. That's what Gemara says. So the Rav Melissa, the Megillah Sasarim asks a good question. He says, well, what do you mean? They didn't have Tefillin before this? They didn't have Yom Tov before this? They didn't have Torah? We had all that. What does it mean that all of a sudden they got Torah and Yom Tov and Bris Milah and Tefillin? We had all that. What exactly does that mean? That's the question. So he says like this. He said what happened was there was this big simcha that happened. Also, this big happiness came down. And when you get happy, just like Rabbi Nachman says, your mind opens up. It says Mordechai was a prophet. He was from the 48 prophets. But until this point, he wasn't having prophecy. And in general, in Bavel, in the exiled Bavel, there was lack of prophecy.
Who said this?
The Rav Melissa, the Megillah Sasarim. There was lack of prophecy during the period of Bavel. And the Gemara says like this, B'choshech hoshavani. The pasuk says, you have put me in darkness. This is the Talmud Bavli. Talmud Bavel, learning of Bavel, which is darkness in a certain sense. Rashi says because they had all kinds of questions. They had tons of questions. So the Gemara, as great as it is, it's not prophecy. It's one step lower than what happened later. Because the Gemara is, I think maybe in the face of all the confusion that the Gemara had, it clarified so many things. It's amazing, the Gemara. But what happened is at this turning point, we went from the brilliance of Talmid Chachamim, but they were lacking, there was certain darkness in the situation. It switched over. There was this great simcha from the nace of Purim. Now, Mordechai got prophecy. Because the prophecy only comes mitoch simcha. That's what it says in the Gemara. Eina v'ushora el mitoch simcha. Mordechai got back his simcha and his prophecy. When you get happy, the deeper understanding comes out. And then all of the Jewish nation became happy as well. So we also beget this elevation as a nation. We all became happy, simcha, and now all of our mitzvahs became much stronger also. The mitzvah of Torah. So the Torah before that's the difference. The Torah of Bavel and the Torah of Eretz Yisrael, which is becoming Torah of a much higher Torah, much loftier Torah, much clearer Torah, came out then. Or is a Torah. That means the Torah now became clearer-minded. And or of a simcha is Yom Tov. The Gemara says that when we were in Chutzars in Galus, so they would laugh at us on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Like, what are you sitting around? Come out, let's have fun. We're doing all this, we're doing that. It would be like we were lacking this Simchas Yom Tov. So now, after our victory and the great simcha we had Simchas Yom Tov. And then it says Bris Milah. So what about Bris Milah? He says, Rabbi Melissa says that when we went to the Suda of Achashverosh, so they brought prostitutes there. And people started doing Averos. So then even though they had physically a Bris Milah, now it's as if they didn't. Like because when a person starts doing those Averos, so it's like the effect of the bris goes away. Now, after all the tshuva they did, and all the new hiskachos they have, the renewal, now they got back kedushas bris. And the fourth thing is tefillin, that now when they are now back in this state of doing the mitzvahs besimcha, with depth, with full kavana connection, so now they start to rise up in the eyes of the nations. Like when the nations see us doing the Torah properly, they start to admire us. And so that's what happened then. And then that's the Yikar, that's tefillin, because the tefillin, it says, the tefillin is something that it represents our honor. And Ru kol ha'amertki Hashem Hashem nikra alecha, that the Shem Hashem is called on us, they can see it, and the tefillin represents that. So we got back all these things at this time. So the idea is that, so you see here in the story of Purim itself, there's this big thing of simcha. When a person gets simcha, just like Rabbi Nachman says, the mind gets free. When you're happy, then you can start engaging the big issues. You throw yourselves into Torah and you start getting this well springs of wisdom, even prophecy. So anyway, so just recapping, so we're coming from Purim now. And Purim is the time when we connect to Simcha. And the singing and the dancing and the whole experience of the togetherness and come away from the Megillah. The whole thing that Purim is like the Simcha. That Simcha is what we have to hold on to. That's very, very exciting. And then it goes naturally into Pesach. It's like a next level, new type of Simcha goes into Pesach. And you hold on to it then, you bring it into Pesach, and then you bring it to the whole year. Comes to Shavuos, comes to Rosh Hashanah and Sukkot. So the Simcha is the key to this Avodas Hashem, to the key to serving Hashem and to our Hatzlacha Baruchnis that we're striving for. Yes, there's a little time for questions. If anybody has questions, comments.
I was looking at from a much deeper point of view, comparing Purim to the attack of Amalek. It's almost the flip side, where in this case we're doing it independently, added to our sense of joy, which then the joy of independence, which energized us, versus with Amalek, where it nipped away at a bit of what we had going on.
So you're saying what? So how does Amalek compare to joy?
Amalek was we had the joy, but it was of dependence.
Joy of what?
Of dependence. We were reliant on open miracles.
By the Milchamas.
So when Amalek attacked us, it chipped away at our joy and at our energy.
It's moving towards that other
direction. It's the flip side, is what I'm saying. Whereas in the case of Haman, we had, because it was hidden, so therefore more of it was independence, and so therefore, in fact, it brought out our joy.
Very good, nice. Okay. Anyone else? Any comments? Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Shkoyach.
At what point was Mordechai? You said he was at some point